Welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast. We're glad you're here. And now our host, Dr. Mike Patterson.
It's March and it's Women's History Month, so what better way to celebrate it than to speak with someone who leads an organization dedicated to helping women overcome societal barriers by providing educational and empowering experiences that promote sisterhood and community. Soul Sisters, the organization we're highlighting today, believes, as I do, that all women deserve to feel safe, supported, and celebrated. And since we talk about leadership and teamwork in the workplace on the Mission First People Always podcast, we're going to hone in on how everyone benefits when women of color feel belonging in the workplace. Unfortunately, that's not always the case, though, but we're here to learn how to change that. So settle in for an informative and empowering conversation.
Welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast, where we talk about better business results, stronger teams, more successful careers, and happier lives. Along the way, we hope to bust some biases, build some bridges, and have some fun. We're glad you're here. And now, our host, Dr. Mike Patterson.
My guest today is Dr. Christine Coleman. She's a licensed therapist, executive coach, and the founder of Soul Sisters, a Bay Area nonprofit that empowers women of color to overcome societal barriers. She's trained leading companies like Pinterest, Business Wire, Coursera, Salesforce, and even the Major League Baseball Network in mental health, inclusivity, and belonging initiatives. Dr. Coleman has published in a wide array of publications like Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, Vogue, MSN, and Huffington Post. She's spoken at many conferences like Yale's Mental Health Conference, UC Berkeley's Women of Color Conference, and the American College Health Association's meeting, and many more. Dr. Coleman received the University of San Francisco's Living the Mission Award for her dedication to serving women and girls. And I'm so excited to have Dr. Christine on our show today. Dr. Christine Coleman, welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Boy, I am excited to talk to you about many things, and I've got a long list of things I want to talk with you about, your organization, the work you're doing, upcoming events, and some really important things that we can talk about in terms of inclusion and helping people feel connected to their teams and their workplace. Excited about all of that. But I'm also excited to know that your undergraduate degree is from Azusa Pacific University. And the reason I say that, and the reason I'm so excited about that, is because I've got two daughters and two son-in-laws who are also APU grads. So it's kind of fun to have that connection with you. And I know that you're well-grounded. So again, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I loved that coincidence as well.
So Christine, before we jump into the heart of our conversation, tell us a little bit about your heart, your organization. You even called it a ministry, Soul Sisters. What is Soul Sisters all about?
Thank you so much for that question. Yeah, I love that you led with my heart. In my sense, what I believe was put on my heart is to have Soul Sisters as a ministry, as an opportunity to serve. It's an opportunity of service that I believe was placed on my heart 10 plus years ago when I was in the middle of my master's studies at that time. I was placed on an internship at an all-girls college preparatory high school where I was firsthand in contact with these young women who had such a heart to grow, to succeed. Their families came often from immigrant backgrounds or marginalized backgrounds filled with sometimes low income situations, sometimes violence, sometimes lack of access to resources that maybe many of us have. And I was a new student and I was wanting to do my best to be a new therapist in this setting. And these amazing families gave me firsthand insight to the many stigmas that still exist across with regards to mental health, especially among communities of color and various marginalized communities. And that's when I realized I can do something that is maybe not so traditional in the sense of mental health regarding talk therapy and traditional approaches. We have to meet people where they are we have to get creative. And so when I thought of Soul Sisters, I thought, how do we connect to women who often feel like they need help and they're scared to ask for it? They're told that they are too much, that they're needy, that especially among communities of color, there's often a stigma that family secrets or things that are private amongst the family and communities should not be shared with others, and a variety of other things. And so when Soul Sisters began, it was something that was just something genuinely I wanted to do. I had no nonprofit background at all. I still very much consider myself an ongoing learner 10 years later, but genuinely it is with the heart and compassion to serve. And even though it's not a faith-based organization, I am a faith-based woman, and that's something that's very important to me to consider what I believe God has put on my heart that is a divine order for me to be in service to others and provide resources to those who might not otherwise have them.
I'm always amazed at how God places people in situations that might not be the final stop on their journey, but it is certainly a stopping point that causes us to see what's next. And he puts things on our hearts that inspire us to step out in faith and do something that he has prepared for us, is preparing for us, and we just have to step into it. So thanks for stepping into God's call on your life. Appreciate the work you're doing. You mentioned nonprofit, and since I've got a lot of folks in the business world that listen. They're curious. I'm curious. How do you support your work? How do you fund your nonprofit? Is it through grants? Is it through organizations, family foundations, or individual folks who get involved with you?
Thank you for asking that. Also, a very important question. That's something that we have admittedly struggled with over the last years. We are a volunteer-based organization. We barely brought on a freelance social media manager because we could no longer manage our outreach through digital platforms on our own. So we have just a little bit of our budget going towards that. And otherwise, the budget really does end up funding a lot of the events and services that we give. And so we have these brilliant rounds of boards. We just had a board close out during the pandemic term, I'm calling it, that really helped us get our strategy in place, rebrand, rebuild, because we had such a great stride of services prior that were really focused on just getting ourselves out there and serving. And so with this I'm calling it the second round of board members we just closed out with, after the strategy came, really thinking about our revenue strategy, which we had never really had in place before because we've all just really depended on raising enough money to spend it to keep on giving. And so even though we have had some grants in the past, they were used quite quickly, and we've never had a stable staff in the past. And now we have this new board who, Mike, they started in January and they have taken off lightning speed with just all these different initiatives that I had in my heart, these different plans I've always had. I whipped up on, as you can imagine, different pieces of paper just coming to life in such a quick amount of time. And when we talk about faith, I just think, wow, there's such a time as this, right? Where I have had my head down with amazing community members and previous board members to do the groundwork and really present the evidence that what we're doing is working, what we're doing is effective, and now we need to have the funding behind it. So to answer your question, we're starting to build out a fundraising calendar. We are depending highly on independent donors, individual donors, as well as corporate partnerships, and pretty much really starting to gain access and insight to how we partner with family foundations or other foundations that align with our mission and values.
Well, hopefully our conversation today will spark some increased interest. Of course, we'll have all your social links in the show notes, and we'll tell people about how they can get in touch with you and stay connected. And I hope that our conversation today helps you do what you are called to do. Now, let's switch gears here and talk a little bit about the topic of the day. We build this conversation as how everyone benefits when women of color feel belonging at work. And I want to unpack that whole statement, but let's kind of build to that. How is burnout affecting women of color in the workforce, maybe in unique ways? Burnout is a big thing, and we keep talking about the pandemic, and perhaps because there's still some pandemic hangover, in our organizations, in our lives, in our churches. So is this COVID related? Is this just life related? What makes women of color unique when it comes to burnout?
Thank you for that question. And you're right. Burnout is unfortunately a broad topic and a broad experience that impacts a variety of us across different identities. And so when it comes to this specificity around women and women of color, there are different hurdles and hoops that we have to jump through and come up against in all areas of society in the world, and in particular in the workplace. And in my practice, so I have Soul Sisters, and thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to share a bit about the organization. And aside from Soul Sisters, and in addition, I could say to Soul Sisters, I have my own company where I serve companies and organizations as well as individuals through therapy and coaching, where I have prioritized, if you will, the experiences of people of color, namely women of color. And so I have a lot of really beautiful opportunities to listen in and hear these direct stories. And I also identify as a woman of color. My mother is Mexican American. My father is Iranian American and actually lives in Iran right now. My experiences have been really unique moving through the world. And when we talk about burnout, there is the basis that affects all of us, right? Of just we're working, we live in a fast-paced world. We are exhausted mentally, emotionally, and even physically. We're doing a lot. We're often not getting appreciated for all that we do. That in and of itself is really the recipe to burnout. And that is something that we have to collectively work against to ensure that we have our well-being centered and prioritized at all times. And that can be difficult, of course, but it's important. When we add on different identity-based factors like our race and ethnicity, like our gender, we're also coming up against a lot of other challenges that maybe people who don't have to navigate those challenges, maybe they don't go through those things, right? And so when we are experiencing burnout based on all the things that we're doing, productivity based and so forth, the identity factors are also contributing to these challenges. We mentioned the introduction of the topic today of belonging, right? When we come into spaces that were not initially designed for us, and people are doing their part to continue to diversify and open up doors and be more thoughtful about how we can integrate people from diverse backgrounds, there's still a lot of hoops and challenges, as I mentioned, that are often rooted in various forms of discrimination. So women of color often tell me, I don't feel like I belong there. I feel like I'm always banging my head up against a wall, trying to get my voice heard, trying to get my idea incorporated. And even if it's not something that is explicit, we internalize this because of the ways that we've learned to maneuver throughout the world. There are different racial-based traumas that we experience, for instance. We also experience a lot of gender-based traumas. And so those can include things like having our head on a swivel, if you will, making sure that we feel safe, making sure we're talking in a way that doesn't sound threatening. We don't dress in ways that don't seem like they have stereotypes tied to them, that we are presumed to be qualified enough through the way that we pronounce things and the way that we have insights, and our ideas that we bring are aligned with that of the status quo. And so we are often just exhausted from trying to just fit in and be accepted and feel psychologically, emotionally, and physically safe in these spaces, again, that were not typically designed for us. So the rates of burnout are great and unfortunately exist across difference, but we also need to be paying attention to the emotional exhaustion that it takes to be a person of color, especially a woman of color, when there is still so much sexism, misogyny, which is defined as the hatred directly towards women because they are identified as women, that we have to maneuver every single day.
That's this conversation is eye-opening for me because I am an older white male, and I see the world through my older white male eyes. And I don't want to do harm. I want to build people up. I want to bring out the best in people. That's sort of my personal mantra. So just recognizing that people on the other side of me come from a really different experience, and what that experience is, I sometimes don't naturally relate to that. So I think it's helpful to call some of that out. Now, I say all of that because I think maybe there's some people who are like me who aren't we don't get up in the morning and say, oh, how do we be misogynistic, bad people that do harm to others? We just don't see it. We don't recognize it. It's not in front of our face. It's not our lived experience. So I hope people listening just recognize there's a lot of good intent, but sometimes we just don't have the awareness to execute on it very well.
I love that you said that, because so much of what our work in diversifying communities, especially in the workplace, I do truly believe I've worked for a while now with, like I said, a variety of amazing people. And I do believe at our core that we are good and that we are well intended. But what you bring up brings up a good point that is often found in diversity, equity, and inclusion research, is that result, right? We can be well intended all we want. And I believe that most of us are well intended, but I think we also often miss the result or the impact that can happen if we're not being thoughtful about the ways in which we have our own implicit biases, right? The things that we've been exposed to. We've been exposed to various stereotypes from a young age, and we internalize those, and it blurs our lens in the world, and it can make some people feel like they are better than or less than others. And that's a hard way to move in the world. And again, most of it is actually not our fault. But at the same time, it challenges us to think more critically and bring it to I often say this, bring it to consciousness, right? Bring it to the
Mhm.
top of our minds, because oftentimes we're just all moving in our own worldview, in our own ways that we see the world. And oftentimes we don't recognize that the things that we've internalized can actually do harm. So in the therapy world, we do our best to uphold the phrase "do no harm." And I think in the workplace, we can continue to also uphold that too. Moving beyond, I didn't intend to let me slow down and think about the ways in which I'm interacting so that I don't cause harm, so that the result does not actually end up being misaligned with my intentions.
Is that kind of the essence of when you go into an organization and do this kind of training? So
Mhm.
we're highlighting Soul Sisters, your nonprofit, but I also know that you have a for-profit side of your work where you go in and do corporate training and work with organizations. Is that a big part of it? Just making people aware that unconsciously or unintendedly, some of our behaviors, if we don't take the time to really be intentional and think, can land in a way that we don't really want it to land.
Absolutely. That is the core of what I do in my for-profit practice, as well as at Soul Sisters. And let me just say this out loud. I'm a continuous learner all the time, because I too have my own biases that I've internalized, and I am consciously doing my best to unpack them and look at them and look at myself, right? So those are all responsibilities, I should say, that I think we all can continue to work towards, and they're important. And I appreciate that you are also able to name yours, Mike, because we're all doing them. And one of the things that is such an important model in this work that I've learned to really incorporate into my work at my company, as well as at Soul Sisters, is the concept of intersectionality, right? We're not just a man, we're not just a person of color, we're not just a white person, we're not just a person with a disability. All the different factors that we hold that are identity based, they intersect, they move together with one another. So I am a woman, I am a woman of color. I'm also able bodied. I don't, to any of my knowledge, have any physical or cognitive disabilities. I belong to a certain socioeconomic status. I would consider myself from the middle class. That's granted me a lot of privileges. But I also have had a lot of run ins with my oppressive identity, which is around being a woman in this world, as well as I said, a person of color in this world. I was born here. That is associated with systemic privilege, because we know that there are people who are not from here, who immigrate here that face great challenges, from just outward hatred to just various other forms of discrimination. So when we look at our intersectional identities and how we move in the world, some of us have ties to systemic privileges. Maybe like you, Mike, being a white male, as you named, those have granted you great opportunities because you don't have to face racism, or maybe you don't have to face sexism, but there might be other things in the world that you have had to face that have been difficult for you. And I think that that offers us an opportunity to lean into compassion, empathy, understanding. And when we start to slow down and recognize we all have associations with privilege, and we might have some associations with oppression, it can allow us to see each other more humanly and allow us to lean in versus lean out and say, you're different, or I don't get it, or I don't want to part in this, or this DEI movement is so silly. It's making other people more platformed than us, what's going on here. The whole point is to be more inclusive and to create an opportunity in the workplace and beyond, I believe, for us to be able to grow closer together, to show up more authentically, and really, as you said, welcome that sense of belonging so we all know we deserve these opportunities just like anybody else.
And these are some political hot buttons these
Oh, yeah.
days.
Oh, yeah.
So you're sort of in the midst of all that.
Yeah.
Let's you mentioned included, and let's inclusion and belonging, and let's pay off the title of the episode, or work to pay that off. What's the difference between being included and feeling like you belong?
Yeah, I love that. They really do go hand in hand, let me say that. And I appreciate that you said that. It has become completely politicized, and to some degrees I can understand it, but in other ways I wish it weren't, because it really is something that, is a we all seek to belong and have that as a core human need to feel valued. As you asked, what is the difference? Belonging to me is, do you feel valued where you are? Can you show up as your full authentic self? There are so many different historic rules of what professionalism is, and oftentimes they're tied to, for instance, appearance, right? There are lots of regulations around people who have different hair textures, namely maybe Black folks who are not allowed to wear certain hairstyles, where as in their culture, they might be very aligned with what their culture represents and what they want to bring in as their full selves, even as professionals. But then sometimes they're deemed as unprofessional. That's just one example. Inclusion, can tie along with that as, do I have a seat at the table? Is my voice heard? Are my ideas and my contributions not only being considered, but actually being put into place as well? And again, as I mentioned, we all as humans have a core need to belong and to feel psychologically and emotionally safe. And so when we are in spaces where we're being told, you don't look the part, you don't sound the part, prove it to me that you deserve this role or deserve this place in this, especially in the workplace, and then beyond, right, in society, in communities, and so forth, the lack of belonging can make us feel really insecure. We have lack of confidence as a result, and also just a lack of worthiness and groundedness in the ways that we move in this world. So I do believe that the workplace can be a great opportunity for us to address this and to continue to uphold this, because that's where we spend a lot of our time, and that's where many of us, I should say, have a workplace or a professional identity. And the people I work with hold their career and professional identities so strongly. And many of us, if you can, imagine it, especially from communities of color and maybe different backgrounds from around the world, we have these dreams, right? We're being told, break the glass ceiling. You can do it. You're the only woman who's in our family who can do this. You're the first one to graduate from college. And there's great joy in that and pride even, but there's also great pressure. So you talked about burnout. We hold those pressures as well. So to be included, to belong, are great core human needs that we can do, and we can practice and uphold and prioritize in the workplace too.
Organizations have spent countless dollars on DEI initiatives, although now there's a little bit of backlash, and we're seeing that in the news. But we spend a lot of money on DEI. I've got many friends and former students and colleagues who work in that world.
Mm.
Why do companies, even companies that have strong DEI initiatives or departments or parts of their organization, it's strong. It's a strong suit for them, but they still miss this belonging piece.
Mhm. That's a really good question. It's so interesting. I was with my father-in-law the other day. My father-in-law is an African American man, and he and we were actually at a family dinner, and I never knew that far before the peak of DEI that happened, during the pandemic in the wake of George Floyd, and there was just this great call and challenge to bring in more DEIB initiatives and roles. He was in the game far before this, and it was so insightful and even refreshing to hear that this work has been going on even before it became, call it a trend, call it something that was picked up. And now we're seeing that, when we place such emphasis on DEIB and treat it as a trend, that's dangerous in a lot of ways because these are real people. We are real people. I'll count myself in there as well. And even with the diversifying initiatives, right, making sure that we have people from various backgrounds, from race to ethnicity to nationality to sexual orientation and so forth, right? We're doing our part to diversify. The belonging aspect, from what I understand, has been added in. And this is, again, an ever evolving effort. More recently, the terminology has added in justice, so DEIJ, because we're also incorporating efforts to really think about social justice, racial justice, gender-based justice, and other forms of justice that are also at the root, right? Not just thinking about what can we do in this institution, but what can we do socially to create and uphold justice in the midst of that so that the systems itself can shift and change. And a lot of organizations are taking part in those works as well. But belonging has also been one that has been more recently added because, again, we understand that with all these different efforts, if you say, well, we're a diverse team, right? We got people, we checked off the boxes for all these different people. Aren't you happy? Right? We're also saying, well, you're included. We brought you in, but can I show up as my whole authentic self where I might have a bit of an accent because English might not be my first language, or I have a certain style of dress, or I have certain styles of food that I like to bring and I don't want to be judged for the way they smell. I mean, there's just all these heartbreaking experiences and stories I've heard where people do not feel like they belong. And so belonging, I think, again, as a core human need where we can all relate to it, I think is something that's incredibly important and essential in the model. And we can continue to practice, again, upholding belonging with that compassion and empathy as a root as well.
So how do we do better? I'm thinking, you got me thinking here, whether it's in a workplace setting or even a community setting with a group of neighbors, friends at our churches. How do we do belonging better?
I love that question. It reminds me of Soul Sisters, where I was new to this, trying to pay attention to the challenges I had, having different volunteers come through, people who truly cared about this work. And we started serving and we started partnering with various organizations who already had clients, if you will, who were receiving services across different needs, such as safety services for women who are transitioning out of domestic violence. We also have served women who are transitioning out of incarceration, women who are unhoused, women who are parents and didn't have access to resources for their children, and a variety of other types of needs. And so when we were doing our work, we were initially going into these partnerships. And then Soul Sisters as a board decided, why don't we start having our own events and invite these women and other women in the community to come to our events? So we started hosting events and looking at all the different, maybe more macro needs, right? The needs that are tied to the resources. So we thought if we handle the resources, then surely they will come and surely they'll have a great time receiving it. And we were kind of tooting our own horn. So we had, for example, transportation passes, right? Or gas cards or childcare. And we started needing all these social based needs in hopes that the women would come and receive the services and support and feel the sisterhood and celebrate sisterhood like other women were. And some of them would come and they would be off in a corner and not mingling with anybody. And if they would kind of just, say hi, or they would come as a group and kind of stay off to themselves and not really mingle. We were wondering, why is that? And some of our, our board or committee members would go over and say, hello, come on over here with us, and do our best to, include them, right? Help them belong, as we're talking about. But it left us with a big question mark, and obviously me with a big question mark. What's going on here? We gave them the resources. We gave them a platform, much like the workplace, right? We're giving you these things to make things more equitable. We're doing our best here. Why are you not feeling happy or grateful?
Right.
And it's hard. And I realized, they felt likely that they didn't belong, right? We're creating these spaces in community at Soul Sisters, at nonprofits, in the workplace. We're doing all these different things. And the belonging piece, if it's missing, it's not going to work. And so your question is so important. In the nonprofit sector, what we're working on right now are different peer-based or ambassador-based initiatives where we can have people who have maybe similar lived experiences, or maybe the partnerships that we do have with people to train them to ensure that folks are really understanding, like, with that, with maybe someone like Dr. Christine Coleman doesn't have the same lived experiences. I might be a woman of color. I might be a woman, but maybe I don't come from the same socioeconomic status or different lived experiences than they do. Maybe we speak different languages, even though we might both speak English, right? And so how do we help bridge that societal gap, which is part of our mission statement? Maybe it is through these ambassador initiatives. We know a lot of nonprofits that do this by, again, having peer resources to help them go out into the communities that they actually represent and letting them know about the resources. So we're going to start integrating more of that again as we continue to grow. And in the workplace, that is why I think representation is so big. And one of the places that can be a little bit muddy is, there is sometimes, an expectation that we're diverse now. So you woman, you person of color, you person from the LGBTQ community, you go out and, create the initiatives, create the different things. And there, while again, that's well intended, there also is, I had a client once, I can say this in a story form. I had a client once who identifies as a Black woman who was there to do a job, had a lot on her plate. The team wanted to have more DEI work and opportunities. And they said, why don't you do it? Why don't you oversee it? And she was like, because I'm the only Black person here. Like, that's not fair to me. I have a lot of things on my plate. And so again, well-meaning, but I think the opportunity is to ask. And if it's not necessarily to head it up, to oversee it, right? We would love your input and insights if you're open to it. Maybe you need to hire out and have different consultants. Like we said, there's a lot of budget cuts and cuts of roles, but if you can get some consultants to do it, a lot of companies and organizations also have what are called employee resource groups that are affinity based, meaning they maybe are a group for mothers, or maybe a group for people who are caregivers, or maybe a group for Black people or Latinx people. Different groups like that to, again, create a sense of belonging, but also then create initiatives that can carry out across the organization that is a broader sense. So people are doing their part. We're trying our best. I think what we're also seeing in the field is a lot more database driven initiatives, which is not my field of expertise, but we're doing this work. There's a lot of data coming through, and we got to run off that data to see what is working and what is not working. So belonging is a core piece of it that I think we're continuing to actively work towards, Mike. But at the same time, we have to remember, how do we meet people where they're at? And if we don't incorporate belonging, there is a risk at hand there that can actually do greater harm than we intended.
So I'm going to ask a really selfish question, and I want you to give me a Mike-focused answer.
Okay.
I'm an old white dude.
Yeah.
How do I personally do better?
Mm.
How do I? Is it about listening? You've said meet people where they are on a couple of occasions. How do I do that? Because there's people like me who want to do better in increasing this sense of belonging, because we want to build people up. We want to pour positive things in their lives. How exactly do I do that? I mean, give me 2 or 3 little tips that I can do better at.
For those who, obviously didn't hear the beginning, I really want to say I appreciated you. It's going to make me tear up a little bit. You saw me, you asked questions about me, and it was so beautiful to see that we had something in common, right? Through maybe Azusa Pacific University, which we didn't expect, right? We found an opportunity to connect. I imagine that you and I have very different lived experiences and different encounters in the world, right? Maybe some doors have opened for you that haven't yet opened for me. Maybe some have opened for me in my own way that haven't opened for you. Or maybe it is not even a matter of open doors or closed doors. It's just about, how do we have a sense of safety and belonging in this world? And as a woman of color, I can tell you that I've had instances where people have told me to leave their neighborhood. People don't care if I'm Dr. Christine Coleman. They just see me as me. I live in a fairly affluent neighborhood that I feel very blessed to have in this time of my life with my husband and my 2 small kids. And in this neighborhood, and what I would consider pretty progressive Bay Area, I've definitely been told to get out of here, or what are you doing in this neighborhood? When I was pregnant with my daughter, my first child, we were in San Francisco. I lived in San Francisco at the time, on the bus. and an older white woman, this is really around us, again, more tense political times, was telling me that baby should never be born. Go back to your country, you terrorist. And those are only a few outward experiences that I've had, but they hurt me. And clearly, all these years later, I still remember them and they affect the way that I move. And sometimes I don't always feel safe or comfortable in the presence of, um, power and privilege. I don't always feel like I can be myself. So I've learned to kind of move in ways in the world. And I think for you, Mike, being aware of that is bigger than you might know.
Mm.
I think just being willing to listen and lean in and not say, "Oh, Christine, you're such an amazing woman of color." Like, it doesn't have to be that explicit, right? It doesn't have to we don't have to make things weird and put people on the spot. But it really is about, I'm taking the time for you. I'm taking the time to see you, find some ways that we can be in common, because a lot of us, when it comes to belonging, there's a word called it's called homophily. You might have heard of that word, maybe not. Homophily is that by human design, we are attracted to sameness. So that's why we see homogenous spaces in work, in community, in society. We often gravitate towards what feels familiar. That's why we might see more white males in the workplace, because that's been a homogenous institutional priority over time, and it continues to be upheld. And so when people are saying, let's diversify this place, let's mix it up, we know that we can represent the world in a better way and actually have better business outcomes as a result. When we do that, and then people are saying they feel threatened by it, that hurts. And it's not just meant to be a feelings thing, because I know people are saying, oh, everyone takes offense to these things these days. It's about where we want to have a place that influences in really powerful spaces to everyday spaces. So, Mike, you having this podcast, you being open to listening to different people's stories and experiences, you also finding those little tiny moments to connect and say, Christine, we don't look alike. We probably don't move the same in the world, but I still want to know you. I still want to see if there's anything we do have in common. We found something within 5 minutes that we had in common with. That is huge. And that helped me feel safer on this podcast. It helped me feel safer to share my story and my insights with your listeners. And that, I think, at the core is, again, it's human compassion, it's human empathy. Then we layer on our differences. Then we say, I can't relate to that, but thank you for showing me more of you, and vice versa. And I think that could heal us as a society, as a world, much more than continuing this divisiveness that we're currently, we've always been in, but we're really currently in this stage.
Yeah,
I hope that answers your question.
yeah, I love that, and I think this idea of just finding common ground. My experience, my sense is that we found a connection within just 2 or 3 minutes of beginning our conversation. But I wonder if that's possible with just about everyone we meet, if we put some effort into it.
I think so.
And I don't want to minimize the fact that there are differences that separate us, but I wonder if we can focus more on building bridges through
Right.
conversation, through connection, through listening, through uplifting others versus the focus on what tears us apart. Now, I'm a business guy. And most of my listeners are business people. I believe that to be true. What's the business case for all of this? Why should business people invest in this? What's the benefit of belonging? What's the benefit of inclusion? What's the benefit of the kind of work your organization does, the kind of work you do as a trainer? Why should we spend money on this? What's the ROI on some of this stuff?
That's a really good question. Well, I think at the end of the day, most of us, I know we're moving into a very technological AI world, but the majority of workplaces still have humans there, still need humans there. And at the very core, we need to be tending to human needs. I'm a mental health professional, and to be honest with you, I don't think I ever foresaw myself working in workplace institutions. I was in community. I was working at high schools and schools and so forth. I didn't see myself in this space. So I'm continuously learning a lot, and I'm challenged with that question in a really good way. But at the core, we're finding, again, we have people there. We need to tend to people. And I think what we're also realizing is it goes in hand with HR, right? What goes in hand, we have people coming up with organizations coming up with different roles like head of people, right? DEI goes in that branch as well. And so when we think about, who is there, we want to ensure that they feel held, that they feel seen, that they're psychologically safe. And as a result, we'll see greater retention rates. We'll see less turnover of employees. We also do this work on a very, very practical basis, but we do this work to prevent really gross outcomes like lawsuits, so which we're seeing all the time, these discrimination cases and so forth. I don't want to, have people solely lean on that as a scare tactic to have this, but I think that those are some things that we have to pay attention to. I've had clients of color go on medical leave and have legal cases because there was so much harm done on the part of racism in their institution. And so these are real stories. These are real things that happen. But if we were to zoom down a bit more, again, maybe somewhere in the middle, we see the positive outcomes of productivity, because when we diversify internally, we can have greater representation for the customers or consumers of whatever your product or service is externally, right? Have the voices come in. Did you ever see this? There was a movie recently. It was so cute. It was on the person who discovered and founded the Flaming Hot Cheeto. And it was a story about I believe he was a Mexican man. I know he was definitely from a Latinx, Latino background, worked as a janitor, and he just got so invested in finding out what his community would actually buy that he did his due diligence at janitorial level to figure out a way to make a chip that his community that would actually buy. These are not necessarily people with a ton of money, but they sure would spend money on these spicy chips, and brought it. I think it was Frito-Lay is the company that's under, and climbed his way up and became, I think, head of marketing as a result. And I think he still holds that role today. If not, I could be misquoting this, so I have to look this up. But anyway, it's just a short story to discover that when we have people who have insights to what their communities want, to what they'll spend money on, to what they'll spend time on, etc., that does a business good too. So diversity is positive from the human need to ensuring that we don't get sued, and to the especially important part of the middle, which is we can have successful businesses and outcomes if we have representation in place.
Well, you've just made me hungry.
Get you some hot Cheetos, Mike.
Yeah, that's not on my lunch menu. But Christine, tell us about it. I want to give you an opportunity to tell us about what's coming up at Soul Sisters. I know International Women's Fest is right around the corner. This episode won't be out by then, but maybe you can tell us some other things that are happening at Soul Sisters that the audience might want to take a look at, or support you in some way to help you pull that off. Just tell us what's around the corner for Soul Sisters.
Thank you for that. This has been so great. When you started off with the questions around Soul Sisters during the top of our time together, especially around the funding, what really moved me was, oh my gosh, the majority of our funding has come from everyday people who say, I have $25 to give, I have $50 to give, I have time to give. And so I want to make sure that folks listening who might have connections to businesses, that's fantastic. I would love to talk with you. I'd love to meet you. And anyone who is just like, I don't really know what connections I have, but I just am really moved by your mission and your work. I have $5. I live in the Bay Area. I could perhaps donate a few hours of my time to come serve at an upcoming event, or I can offer some of my insights to serve on a committee in the future. Things of that nature. That is what allows Soul Sisters to thrive. That's what's gotten us through for 10 plus years. So when we think about what's ahead, what I am really excited to share in this space, and what I'll be sharing at this upcoming weekend festival in honor of Women's History Month and International Women's Day, which is March 8th, is that we're actually going to kick off what's called our Enrich membership. And again, I've mentioned that we've done a variety of services across mental health, physical health, the arts and professional development. And we have done them very much events based, right? One event here, one event this quarter, and so forth. Enrich is a really positive step forward where we're going to be offering women who might not otherwise have resources to be able to access different courses, to be able to become Enrich members. So Enrich will consist of monthly online classes that are free for women from who would like to learn more about their mental health and have different mental health practices in place, who would like to learn more about different fitness and nutrition initiatives, and we'll have trainers and specialized people facilitating those. We are having our first course in April that will be on financial literacy with a local corporate partner that will be teaching women about how to do better in financial planning and so forth. And so we will have these running classes multiple times each month, and we're kicking it off in April. I'm announcing it at the festival this Saturday. I'm so excited for this because this feels like a positive step forward that will really help us have our community of clients or women we serve just on a more consistent basis. And so that just feels, we talked about faith earlier, like such an answered prayer. I've had this idea in my mind for years now. And as I said, our board members, our committee members have really helped this move forward and actually come into place. So we will have more information on our website at soulsisters.org. If there are listeners out there who would like to potentially sign up to host a free course for the community across those 4 pillars, please let us know. If you are interested and your company wants to help sponsor a woman, because even though she's receiving this free, it costs money internally to help have these resources at hand. If you want to be a corporate partner or a business partner with us and help us fund these opportunities for women, that would be amazing. So please feel free to reach out to us at soulsisters.org. And also, I'll make sure to give you my personal contact information, Mike, so folks can also email me or reach out to me if that feels helpful.
Excellent. And those links are all in the show notes, but Soul Sisters is SOL, Sierra Oscar Lima, sisters.org, soul, SOL, sisters.org, where you can get all that information. Christine, this has been a great conversation. I've got to land the plane here. Here's how I end every episode. I ask my guests to give the audience one piece of practical advice that they could begin applying right away that will help them lead better, serve better, be a better teammate or colleague or friend in this context of belonging.
What really comes to mind with that question, Mike, is really leaning into our self-worth, right? Knowing that we are all worthy of good. We are all worthy of belonging. We're all worthy of access to opportunities and having our dreams come true. And even though confidence is something that is told to us and sold to us, I believe in confidence. I believe in self-confidence and the confidence of others and pouring into that. But if we don't feel worthy of just being who we are, confidence is only going to be temporary. So I invite us all to continue to pour into our own worthiness and speak worthiness and highlight other people's worthiness to them. Do not miss a moment to tell people how much you appreciate them. Do not miss a moment to tell them how much they've impacted your life. Do not miss a moment to tell them how lovely of a person they are, how beautiful they are, how worthy they are. That can help pour into their own view of their own worthiness. So let's continue to be light to others. Soul Sisters, really quickly. Soul means sun in Spanish. And I think of Soul Sisters as sisters of light, right? Sisters that bring light in a world that can be dark. And so go out there and be light to others, and do not forget to shine your light into other people's lives, and remember to tap into your own worth.
It was a great piece of advice. Thank you, Christine, for being a great guest. The word I've written on my notepad a couple times as we had this conversation, and this is my perspective here, having a conversation with someone like you, and thinking about this idea of do I reflect this idea of belonging? Do I invite people? Do I connect people with people where they are? I wrote humility on my notepad. I need to continue to be humble. I need to continue to be a learner. I need to continue to lean into these opportunities and these conversations And so that's what I'm taking away from this. It's been a great conversation. You've been a great guest. I encourage people to check out soulsisters.org to connect with you, to support the work. And thanks for being a great guest, Christine. Come back again sometime.
Thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate everything today.
I love the idea of women supporting women, like we've just heard about with the Soul Sisters Empower opportunities. But in truth, we should all be investing in each other, building each other up, and working to bring out the talents of each and every person, not only on our teams and within our sphere of influence, but within our communities. That's really what the Mission First People Always podcast is all about and why we do it. So if you've enjoyed the conversation today, tell a friend to listen, leave a review, subscribe, follow, listen to future episodes. That's the way people find us, get to know us, and we expand the good work we're trying to do here. So until next time, make a relational connection with someone and invest in that relationship. It will benefit everyone involved.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to create a stronger, more people-centric and empowered culture for your organization, visit drmikepatterson.com.